Thank you. So it's a privilege. My name is Srikanth Ranganathan. With me is Ketan Gilani, and it's a privilege to be here talking about service manager and systems center data warehousing and reporting. And before I get into the details of this session, I just wanted to just quickly re-emphasize that this is going to be a data warehousing on service manager. So I want to have a quick show of hands if how many people are already familiar with or using Service Manager data warehouse. Okay, awesome. We have about 10% of the people, so that's great. So that'll help me set the pace for it. This is going to be a little bit deeper in the technical side, but it is not essential for you to actually do everything that I'm going to show you, but it'll provide you a context in terms of what the capabilities are. If there is going to be one takeaway point at the end of the session, it would be the capabilities that we have built into the product and the flexibility that it offers so that you can actually do self-service reporting if you use this product out of the box. You don't have to do any code. You don't have to do custom development. And that will be the key takeaway. So it does get intense during the session, so help me give feedback so that I can pace it accordingly. But given the fact that only 10% of the audience have experienced this in the past, I'll try to go a little bit slower and make sure that you do have the benefit of making sure that the takeaway points are well absorbed. With me is Ketan, and he will be doing some demos with me along the way. With that said, let me just start. So we'll spend a few minutes on what is data warehousing, why System Center and Service Manager are actually investing in it. Talk briefly about the architecture. And if you're already familiar with data warehouse outside of Service Manager, you'll probably find that that's a very intense effort, not only to build and maintain, and it's a lot of custom development work. And out of that comes tremendous flexibility in terms of reporting and analytics. But it'll also give you an idea as to how we are approaching this and why we believe that this is a much more maintainable solution for our customers. And we'll spend on that a few minutes on that. I'll talk about scale. Data warehousing, as you all probably know, is going to contain a lot of data. And we'll talk about how the product that we ship out of the box in 2012 RTM addresses scale, and what some of the scale limits are. And if there are any questions around scale that you have in particular, I can actually take them offline. We are actually creating some performance reference guides as well. Very briefly into the concept of data warehousing for people who are not necessarily fully familiar with the data warehousing concepts. And then we'll spend about 30 minutes of this session, about 50% of today's session, in going through a couple of different demos, because I think that's the key thing. While this architecture and the designs are necessarily good as a backdrop and as an overview, it's not super critical for you to actually enjoy the fruits of those benefits. It's if you know Excel, and that's good enough right now, or if you have used PowerPoint, not PowerPoint, Performance Point, or if you use SharePoint, that's good enough. It's just click, drag and drop and clicks that'll actually get the reports that you desire. And that's what we want to go. We want to invest in self-service reporting with little or no investment in coding. It doesn't, of course, address everybody's scenarios. So we do have an extensibility and a customization framework, and you can actually go back and do that as well. With that said, let's talk about data warehouse. It's primarily an offline data store. So as you're already familiar with this, in any operational store, running big queries is actually going to bring down your online performance or your operational performance. We don't want to do that, and it's not the convention as well. If you look at any data warehousing concepts, people do have an operational store and a data warehouse store. It's pretty normal. That's industry, and that's how the best practices are, and we do follow that. So we have a separate database where all the data gets aggregated. And I'll probably, as I go through this, I'll share with you the data that you store in the operational store and the data that you store in the data warehouse. The format is different. And the reason why the format and the structure is different is they are serving two different purposes. The operational store is optimized for you to keep the transactions going fast. and it is normalized. In the data warehouse, we denormalize data, and I'll talk about star schemas and others later in the session, but the intention there is to ensure that you have queries and it's optimized for query performance, and you can get your reports out. And that's the whole idea, is to take the data from an operational data store, transform it in a way that is actually most optimized for queries, and then do it in such a way it's an offline store, it doesn't impact operational performance. So if you're using Service Manager, you probably heard about the concept of grooming. If not in other products, you have a similar concept. You can't store transaction data in your operation store forever. So you do have thresholds, so 1 year's worth of data, 2 years worth of data, 3 months worth of data, depending upon your situation. But once you have Service Manager data warehouse, it's going to bring in these operational data. It's going to go back and put it in a different store in a different format, but it's going to give you a little bit more longevity. So it's going to be an offline store. It also helps you with storage. You can have 7 years worth of retention in one case because of your policy and the compliance requirements. You don't want to do that in your operational store. We're also optimizing the data warehouse for high volume storage. We'll talk about some of the architectures that we have put in place to ensure that not only do we store volume, we scale them, and then we're able to address them in our query performance as well. As I mentioned earlier, the data format will be different and is different, and it's important to know that in the backdrop of in terms of why it's different. It's optimized for a different reason, and it's optimized for queries, and you'll probably see as I go through the demos, you'll see how I'm able to navigate those data and give you the data that you want in a really fast manner. In order to do that, I need to structure data differently, and that's what we'll talk about in those. And when I get to a section of talking about cubes, datas, dimensions, there'll be a lot of words that I'll throw out, but at the end of the day, the takeaway message is there is ops store, an operational store, there's a data warehouse. The data warehouse gives you flexibility for querying and reporting and analysis that requires a certain structure of data, and we'll walk through that. Let me just switch the monitors here for a second and talk to you about the architecture. Apologize for that. Give me a second. There you go. So if you go to Bing and search for Service Manager job aids or System Center job aids, there's a collection of documents and tools that we have actually published. I'll show that for a second. What you'll get here is there's a whole bunch of things that we have put architecture diagrams, we put the data models, and these are all available for download. And you just have to go search for job aids package, and you'll get a bunch of these visuals, Visio diagrams, which help you understand in terms of what we're talking about, because it does get pretty detailed. And it's important to know that in the context, because when you're trying to create a report, you need to know what data is available or what relationships are available for you to actually construct meaningful reports. So if you download, I strongly encourage people who are now going to go create reports to go download this Visio diagram, not just the architecture one, but the data model ones as well, so that you can understand how the data flows, how the relationships are captured, and so that you can actually go back and create reports. Now, coming back to the architecture diagram. So what you have is, if you've used Service Manager before, it's a management server. It's a server that actually, Service Manager is a platform that brings data from other System Center components. If you're not familiar with Service Manager has a database called CMDB. CMDB is a normalized database of all the data coming in from other systems. Examples here would be if you're using Ops Manager data flows into Service Manager. If you're using VMM, Virtual Machine Manager, to manage your private clouds as well as your data center, it's got a bunch of templates and libraries and clouds and all this, they come into Service Manager. If you have Config Manager, what it discovers, that data comes into Service Manager. So Service Active Directory, it comes into Service Manager. I'm sure you have attended some sessions on Orchestrator. If not, I'm giving another session later today, how Service Manager and Orchestrator work together. So if you're familiar with runbooks and automation, those data come into Service Manager. And why is that important? Service Manager brings all this data in from different components of System Center, as well as with other products like Active Directory, and even products external to Microsoft via its connector framework. And once you have all this data, you're now able to have meaningful processes around that, or you're able to now go back and act on the data. And that's the key thing about Service Manager. Now, Service Manager is now able to offer all these solutions like incident management, problem, all the ITL processes, or we just released a private cloud solution on top of it. We have a compliance solution called IT governance and compliance. All these things operate on the data that you already have in your enterprise, monitored in different pieces and parts by System Center components. We bring them all in, we normalize them, and we manage all the resolutions and conflicts so that you have a single source of truth. That's the idea behind Service Manager in general. Now, what we do in addition to that with the data warehousing component is to seamlessly let that data flow into the data warehousing component, and suddenly you start seeing relationships and patterns that you did not see before. If you want to correlate two pieces of data, now you already have the data flowing in through Service Manager, and which already has all these other data coming in from other components. And you can also configure data warehouse to go explicitly talk to specific data sources, Ops Manager or Config Manager, bypassing Service Manager as well. But it doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, data warehouse gets all this data, and then you can start forming relationships and seeing patterns. And that's the goal of the session today. So with that as a backdrop, if you see data warehousing, the data warehouse, there's a Service Manager here which is automatically pumping data into the data warehouse stack. And if you're familiar with, it has a very standard construct. It's a separate server. It has some workflow built in, and it can actually run some jobs. And in data warehousing language, data goes through three distinct phases. First, you have a set of source data. So you need to go extract that data. Second, you need to transform the data to the, earlier I talked about how the data needs to be, the source data is in an operational context and in an operational schema. It needs to be transformed into a different schema so that you can actually do querying. So that is the transform process. And finally, all the tables are all loaded. So ETL is the acronym for that. But it's a set of processes, if you can actually, and we just have to know about this in general, but for people who are going to consume this service, they don't have to worry about all these things. But it's there, and people who are operating on it might have to worry about a little bit if the jobs are not started, you have to start it. But just put that into the context of there's going to be 3 or 4 distinct phases, and, and the jobs are going to run automatically, pull the data, transform it, store it into a context that can be queried. We take that one step further and then create cubes. And cubes is another construct and another schema which is more suitable for analysis. So you'll probably see that the data is flowing in, it's getting transformed, and all these things that are happening automatically. Once you install the product, it's going to do it for you. But it's good to know that it's happening. And as the data flows through, it's going to get cubed up, and we call them OLAP cubes for analysis. And once you have this cubed up, a whole bunch of possibilities open up. If Microsoft has invested a lot in, if a lot of people, I just show of hands in terms of using SSRS. Okay, so we have about a few people using SSRS, so you're very intensely familiar with how it can actually consume the cubes. And if people are using Performance Point and SharePoint, you can actually see that it can actually show the data in cubes instantly into dashboard. So what System Center and Service Manager have done is, hey, not only should we show them in the let's cube them up automatically, and that's going to happen as part of our basic out-of-the-box package. And once you have them cubed up, you can either surface them in Excel, because Excel supports cubes, or you can support them through SharePoint, through Performance Point, so the dashboard instantly light up. And this whole investment here is to ensure that two things happen. One, we don't know what reports that you're going to create and what makes sense for the individual consumers. So we provide a whole bunch of components and where you can actually go construct your own report. That's self-service reporting. You should expect that out of the box today, and we do. Second is make sure that it's available in the most common form that people consume today, which Microsoft has already invested in the form of Excel and in SharePoint. They just automatically light up. So these are existing tools, existing technologies that you don't have to relearn once they're all cubed up. So all the things that I just talked about is done by software today. Your job is when you actually install the product, when the data flows in, to say which fields are relevant for me and for my business purposes and how to run my organization, and you drag and drop them and the reports just happen. And if we do that, I think that is a big win because you're getting the power of the analytics and the power of the cubes without having to write a line of code. There are people who are going to go back and say, it doesn't actually do everything that I want to. We have a very declarative way of actually extending the solution and create new cubes if you want to with one line of XML. And I'll show that to you in a second. I'm sorry, I'm having some challenges here. I need to go back to the PowerPoint. Okay, got it. Again, I'm going to go back in time. The current investment in data warehouse replaces an already known product called SCRM. And I don't know if anybody has used SCRM. It's even before my time, but there is one gentleman who can talk about it. But this, obviously, it's not widely aware and widely used. But again, it's System Center's reinvestment into the warehousing because we think that's super important. We have a lot of data in our component that we collect. We'll continue to invest in it and making it easy for us to consume. So this product and this solution is going to replace SCRM. And self-servicing, and as I mentioned before, our investments now are going to be in enabling self-service. You probably heard about, if you attended any of the private cloud talks, self-service is one of the key components of how IT as a service can be enabled. That's one dimension of self-service. Another dimension of self-service, even reporting, we don't want to invest a lot of time in creating custom reports. And every time you make a change, and then you go through a whole about 2 weeks worth of work, and then redo this report. And it's a very strict experience. So we want to open that up to be a self-service experience. We already have tools in Excel and Performance Point that enable you. So all we're doing is to it's a better together story. So we System Center investments into making them into cubes, and the rest of Microsoft tools just light them up, and our customers get the benefit of that. So the earlier products, before Service Manager, still function the same way. It's going to get data from other components and allow you to create reports. We continue to make sure that that is an in-parity experience from the functionality standpoint, but from an ease of use standpoint and creation, this is going to be a whole lot different. I mentioned a few minutes ago about scale and perf. So the current framework, if you're doing a demo, which I'm going to do right now, is a single box solution. So you have all the data warehouse components into one box, low volume data, good enough for reports, totally okay. But there are times that you don't want that to happen. Number one, I'm bringing only data from Service Manager, but you can bring data from Ops Manager and Config Manager as well. So suddenly we can start seeing the data getting bloated. Third, that you want the performance characteristics of the single box solution obviously doesn't meet the production needs. And what's sufficient for demo and an environment, totally okay, not okay for production. So we do have the ability to go back and say, as I mentioned, there's an ETL, extract, transformation, and load. you could actually separate the jobs and the data into different marts. You can specify that during the installation time to say, hey, segregate them, and it'll automatically happen. You just it's for a person who's installing the product, it is just a choice that they have to make. But you should know that the ability to segment them into databases exists, or data marts exist. We can actually come back and then even go one more down and say, hey, I want them into completely different servers. I have my reporting server, which is different. I have my cube server is different. And so we have a much more fanned out story here. And if you're thinking, oh my God, if this is what it takes for me to even get this, that is not true. You can still go back, and this is the minimum configuration for your demos, your proof of concepts, and even for small loads. If you just want to take it, that's totally okay. Just that as you plan, we have guides in terms of telling you what's roughly the time that inflection point between when you want to switch over to the bigger ones and you want to stay with the smaller ones. You can use that as a guidance. One guidance that we're using, at least in the service manager context, if you're servicing less than 20,000 users, then you don't look at a scale-out story. You're still, the amount of data that you're going to bring for 20,000 users, the millions of records of computers and everything else, totally okay with a smaller configuration. But once you go beyond the 20,000 users, our typical guidance is, hey, look for some scale-out recommendations. And you can also use SQL Enterprise as opposed to SQL Standard. But the choice does exist. So wrapping this up, the entire investment that we are making is actually going in line with Microsoft's BI stack. So 2 things. Number one, Microsoft is already investing in Excel, SharePoint, and the business intelligence stacks and SSRS. System Center will just take advantage of those capabilities by making sure the underlying schema and the technologies actually help align and just light up. With the existing technologies, you can actually create your own reports the way you want them, the way you can brand it, you can measure your KPI. There are a few people who are using SSRS already, so it's tremendously flexible. If you're using Performance Point, SharePoint is so viral. People are using Performance Point as a dashboarding solution, and I'll show later on how it is all talking to live data. And whether you view it through Excel, if that's what your comfort zone is, or if you've invested in Performance Point and you want to share it out, that's totally okay. The underlying data and the underlying mechanisms and how to get it still remain the same. Very easy to use. And if none of these things work for you, you don't want to do, just fine. Put it in a file share. You don't even need SharePoint. Put it in a file share, have Excel. That works as well. So with that, I want to just take the next 10, 15 minutes, actually show what I just talked about, because nothing comes as powerful as showing you the demo. And we have released System Center 2012 RTM recently. You should be able to, anything that I'm talking to you today should be available in the product, and you should actually be able to see it and experience it for yourself. I'm going to introduce Ketan. Welcome, Ketan. And Ketan is going to walk you through a demo of a self-service report creation. So do you want me to switch the cable thing for you? Number 2.
Thank you, Srikanth. Okay, number 2. And then we go up here. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some of the things in the demo first, and then we'll talk about the concepts there behind it. Some of you have already installed Data Warehouse. You're familiar with it. Great. I think we can, and you can help others reinforce the concepts, help us at the same time. So let's go through some of the things. So how many of you have actually Service Manager in your environment and installed or are working or planning to install? Okay, that's quite a few actually, about 50%. Okay, that's very good. I think we want to take the next step to take to data warehousing, where not only you can get from Service Manager, but you can include reports from or data from Operations Manager, Virtual Machine Manager data will come in through Operations Manager and the Config Manager. You could have that in there. So as you can see here, wrong mouse. Okay. As you can see here, we have something called cubes here, right? So we have, and I'll go through some of the cubes here and just to what these are. These are out-of-the-box cubes we provide. Anybody can tell me where the power management cube came from? No? Config Manager. Yeah, so this came from Config Manager data. So that's a power management cube from the Config Manager data. And then we have the config item cube. Again, that's basically from our database. We actually have a connector to Config Manager, and then we get all the config item cube up here. And then we have a couple other cubes that are not out of the box, but the process packs are available out of the box, like the compliance compliance program detail cube, compliance result cube. These are cubes from our GRC process pack, or the compliance process pack that you can get for Service Manager, which is available for free to download. Then we have additional cube like, actually I don't see it here, but there is a cloud service process pack cube that will come also along with the cloud service process pack that you can download also from, that's available for System Center 2012 actually. And Shrikant just said, how many are familiar with Cloud Service Process Pack? Okay, a couple. So what that is, basically, it's a private cloud enabler in terms of for cloud services. So basically, you can now request virtual machines. Out of the box, you'll be able to request virtual machines. It talks to VMM, gets the templates in, gets the other data in for you to have self-service request for provisioning virtual machines. You can create different capacity pools for the different users or departments within the organization, and then they can request and provision and basically automatically provision virtual machines in the private cloud. So that's the Cloud Service Process Pack, which is available for System Center 2012. Okay, and then you have these service catalog cubes, work item cubes. Software updates, of course, are the software updates that will come with Config Manager in there, and then change activity management cube. So these are the cubes that we ship out of the box. So cube, in a way, basically contains the data that is transformed and that you can do analysis on, right? So, and I'll go through some of that, and I'll show you some of the canned we have done already, and I'll show you briefly on how easy it is to create some of the reports. Okay, just before I go there, let me just give you a little bit of overview. So you have something called data sources. And the data sources basically are, in this case, is just the SM and another DW registered, but you could register a config manager data source. Actually, I think the DW controller also has a config manager on it, but and you can register an OM data source also here. So that's a registration of different data sources. Then Shrikant talked about the different jobs. Yeah, go ahead.
So if you put in the connector in the Service Manager console,
correct.
does that mean that the data flow is already coming into the data warehouse?
Correct. You need to create, because data warehouse, it's again a separate management server in there, and you need to create a separate source connection for the data warehouse. Because there's a lot of data, and you don't want all that data coming into the CMDB. Good question. So you see that a lot of jobs that are running in here, they run on a regular basis. I think by default, I'm not entirely sure, but I think it was every 4 hours that we have it by default where we do the extract, transform, load. There are some jobs done more frequently. There are some jobs that run a little more infrequently just to make sure that we don't have impact to our online system. But they are configurable, right? So, and also, you can see, let me go to the analysis library. So here, in the analysis library here, what you're seeing here is actually basically an UNC path. What this allows you to do is dump your Excel reports that you develop, or dump your, it could be a SharePoint site path too. So basically now whatever analysis that you do and you put in here, it'll be available to the users directly either on SharePoint or on a share that you can provide. Again, I know only few of you use SSRS, but I'm sure all of you use Excel. So that's where there's a zero learning curve. But with Excel, how many of you use pivot tables or power pivots or? Okay, that's few of you guys. So, but we'll see how easy it is to create some of the drag and drop. Okay. Okay, so let's go through here. I'll go back to the cubes. And if I just kind of point out, so we have the compliance process pack installed here. That's why you see the compliance and risk items. That's a process pack that's available. Data warehouse and reporting, it's available here once you have access to that stuff. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you a little bit just to create what we do out of the box and how easy it is to create it. And then I'll show you some of the canned reports. Unfortunately, the canned report that I have or that I created is not able to talk to the source right now, so I may not be able to filter very quickly. But I'll at least be able to show you the reports that we can create, and you can see that the dashboard and all that power capability that we can create. So here, I can analyze the cube in Excel. So once I analyze it, it just pulls up the Excel. What this does is basically now it has created a connection to the data source within data warehouse, right? Within the cube in data warehouse. And now it's basically a pivot table that's there, and that's available for you to look at it. So for example, let's look at it here. I think if you look at, actually go back here. So if I look at here, what I want to see, so for example, I want to see number of incidents here. So I'm going to pull in an incident dim here. I go to the incident dim. Again, I'll go through the terminology, what the dim dimension is and what a fact and measure is and stuff like that. And I can get the count. So you see I have 47 incidents in here, right? I can see how many active are there, how many are resolved. Let's see if I can get result count, right? You can see I can get that information. And then if I were to look at it, different dim, to see if I can get to a proper category. I exactly don't know all the data that's there in the data warehouse table here, because this was created by somebody else. What we're going to go through here, let's see if I can get to incident dim, and then I have, that's one more thing I was looking for. Okay, classification. Okay, let's go to the status. If I go incident resolved, actually I can do priority if there is a separate on priority. You can see I have actually only priority 9 here incidents in there, which are available. That would be not a very useful data, but definitely this is again a what do you call sample data, so you see that in there. And then if I had any escalated incidents, I can see that. But the basically the interesting thing is that now you have all this data available, right? And you can basically manipulate in Excel. It's available because what happens, what we have seen, right? We had, in 2010, we had reports, SSRS reports out of the box. And the customers came back. Almost every customer we went to is, oh, I need this column here, or I need this count here, or I need this average here, I need this here. We cannot satisfy everybody, right? But if you're able to give you the tools, and the tools are easy for you to create, or tools that you use every day to create some of these things, and you look at anywhere in your organization, they use mostly Excel reports and charts. So we said, let's create something where they can use the tools that they have, can use the power of Excel or power of analysis that Excel provides, so that they can create almost all of their own stuff. So this is where basically you can create it. And similarly, very similarly, if you just do like, if you were to just do very similar, very simple way in Excel, you just do insert, you create chart, and in a matter of seconds, you'll have a chart that's there for the incidents resolved or incident active, right? So it's very simple to create these dashboards and stuff with the data you already have or the data we already provide. And I can show you some example here that's there already, which I've created. I was telling you that I was not able to connect to the the other thing actually I was going to tell you, one second. Let me see if I can find that here. There is, if you guys are familiar with slicers, there is something called slicers in Excel. If you go to okay, and then you go options here. There you go. And then if you go to the insert a slicer, it's a very powerful tool where it automatically figures out from the pivot table that's there, and then you would insert a slicer. Now it'll tell me what slicer I want to install here. I can say, look at incident dim, right? And I can say status. Okay. Or I can say priority here. And then you could see that basically what they'll have is a slicer which is available for the different priorities that are there. There is blank or this thing. And when you select something, then it'll only show you data for that purposes, right? So it's basically you have a dynamic report that you are able to create now with Excel. So very, very powerful feature. And I'll show you a couple reports that we created, but I was not able to connect it back to the source because that source had more data in it right now. With the connectivity, we were not able to create. But again, this is the same data that I was creating there. We have additional stuff in there where it says now the data which was there, which has category. You can see the category that we have, and then you have open, resolve count, incidents, active incidents count. In addition, what we added was these KPIs that we added. So we have an SLA KPI that we added. Basically, this one requires a little bit of coding there, which tells you saying, hey, what a green threshold means, what a red threshold means. So then basically then it indicates that it goes above 90% or whatever, then it's a green. Then below some percentage, it goes a red. So basically, we have to tell that to Excel, and it automatically pulls in this color coding in here. And at the same time, you get this pie chart also available as I showed you in the data too. So this is, again, very powerful. And you can see that this is all available with System Center 2012 data warehousing reporting. There's one more as an example I can just show you that was created, was KPI by service. Now here, where you actually have related items from a service to from incidents onto the other related items. For example, you could have all incidents related to a particular service, say Exchange service running, or an HR web service or an application that's running, right? Or you could have other related items. For example, it could be related to a problem record that you're analyzing or change request that's causing incidents. So you can actually have relationships that you can trigger different reports off. Okay? And you can see here that it's for these different services, and then you have overlaid the SLA on top of it. And these are the slicers I was talking about. Right now, I'm not able to click the slicers. It's just give me an error because it's not able to connect back to the data source. And once you publish these reports on SharePoint, it's available basically almost to everybody in the organization who has access to that site. So very, very easy to create. So let's go into a little bit of the slides to explain some of the terminology. Let me go in there. Okay.
One.
Yeah.
Do you want me to do that or you're doing it?
Yep, we're there. There. Okay. So again, data warehouse, basically, again, we have a star schema model here, but again, it's optimized for analysis, right? Any OLAP basically is optimized for analysis. It's made for large sets of data that you can analyze, versus OLTP, which is made for large sets of data, but that you can write and read fast. It's not optimized for analysis. But data warehouse, this OLAP is optimized for analysis, where you can have large sets of data. So dimension represents the tables that represent the classes and the properties and enums. So for example, it is incidents. You can see incident dim. The properties and enums, for example, classification is an enum. The category is an enum. Properties are like title, display, those kinds of properties in there. And then you have, again, from a perspective of the complexity of the data is basically the complexity. We are trying to hide the complexity on what all this encapsulates. Basically, we're trying to introduce more from a management pack perspective where you can author some of these things in XML. You require some technical depth, but you don't require as much technical depth as requiring to write C# code or VB code in there. And also the dimensional model that we have put in here actually simplifies the queries that you can do from a perspective of putting that stuff in the XML. Okay. And if you go into the next slide, again, the benefits of the OLAP cubes, it's handcrafted. You can custom code, test it and deploy it, custom management cube process. You can extensible through new code releases. Again, there's people who watch Spider-Man, which says, right, with power comes responsibility. With complete flexibility also comes responsibility, right? So making sure that what queries and stuff that you write, you need to make sure they're a little performant. Otherwise, you may be bringing down the performance of the data warehouse, right? So you want to make sure that because it's completely open in terms of what you can write, you just make sure that what you're writing is performant. It's based on the management pack model that I said. You could have as simple as 1 or 2 lines of XML that can do a lot of things, versus you can have a complex report that have multiple lines of XML in there. You have localization is built in, so you don't have to worry about that. There is some automatic partitioning of performance based on what you select, on queries you select. There is some performance automatically we take care of it, but still you need to make sure that the queries are performant. It is upgradable, so cubes is upgradable. So basically, the cubes you write now would be upgradable to when we release a new version, say SP1 or the version after that. Okay. And we do have common cubes that are shipped out of the box. Again, dimension represents a class. Here you can see that dimension, the action log dim, is nothing but a class that we have that has related to the incident. You can report on that basically just in the Excel that, as you saw, the incident dim that I selected in there. It says 1 row per object of the class, but how many columns? Of course, all the columns in the class you could have, right? You could just drag and drop. With the check marks, you can include the number of columns you want in the report. You can have for derived and extended classes, right? So basically, you could have, say, work item, and then you could have a change and activity cube also, right? So change is derived from work item. So incident is derived from work item. So what I showed you was a work item cube, but you could create a little more smaller cube for incident cube, which has mostly all incident-related work items versus just all the work items. Okay. It does include hierarchy support, so extended classes and derived classes are also in there. So what are fact tables? Fact table is basically something that you want to track change over time, right? For example, you want to track status over time in terms of how long the status was in active state, or how long was it on hold. That's kind of a little more important for people who to track. Many times they do that. How long the status was on hold for this one. The incident that was losing SLA or not meeting SLA, how long was it in different statuses, right? That's another fact that you could derive from the fact tables in there. The fact tables can target relationships, like SLA is a relationship, or it can target enum changes of classes. So some status changes it happens from active to pending, or active to pending to resolved. You can basically that's where the fact tables are targeted to. And then you can, of course, write your own business logic based on this. You can define custom cubes. As easy it is, you just basically put in XML and defines the subsystem, basically a demo incident cube in there. As you see, it's very easy to define a custom cube if you wanted to. And then you can define what the cube would mean also. Okay. And this is where basically what you want to include in the custom cube, right? Basically, you have a measure group name. Measure groups and measures, if you think about from a perspective of, just think about from a perspective of, as we talked about the enums that were related to the class, but the measure group relates to a cube, right? Just the facts relates to an element in the data warehouse or the class or the properties that we talked about, but the measure group relates to a cube in here. In this case, this incident is about a computer is a measure group name that we are doing, but it targets the work item about config item fact. So it's basically still measure group is for the cube, and then it again targets the fact that you have defined already. And then once you define this, it automatically contains all the related dimensions and outriggers for the cube that you define. So for example, when you do this work item about config item fact, when you don't have to define anything further, whenever the incident is related to the work item and you see related to a config item or computer, it'll actually pull in that data for that cube. You can also substitute in the custom cube substitutions. Relationship often target generic classes, right, like config item or work item. And reports are about generic items are a little boring, as it says. Then what you do is basically you said, change the substitution-enabled rich analysis. So in this case, as you can see, that basically here relationship, it changes the stuff to incident dim. So it's not generic to work item dim, but to the incident dim in here. And they replace the generic dimensions with specific dimensions, and so that allows you to a little more richer reporting. The reason we went with work item earlier was basically we wanted to make sure that you had something that you can start with, whether it's incident change or problem. So we went with work item earlier. You can also put some actions in there in terms of it basically allows you to do a little more. With BI tools like Excel and SharePoint, they can discover and surface these actions. And you will see some of that actually when we go through the performance point also. You can also have calculated measures. So basically now what you can do is you can calculate a measure dynamically based on the data that you have. What I was telling you was also about the threshold, the KPIs. It's a calculated measure that you could have. Sometimes you could have the surface any class of property, and then you have aggregate functions like sum or min or max. You can surface that too. Custom MDX. MDX is a SQL language for cubes, similar to Excel functions. Very rich in features. You could use MDX queries to actually query the data in your cube that you want to surface. I talked about the key KPI a little bit. I showed you Basically, you can define your KPI. It's not just another measure, but you can define your goals, and you can define a threshold that you want, and then is higher better or lower better, right? You want to define that threshold, and then basically you can create the appropriate report that'll target that from that perspective. Okay? So with that, I'm going to give this back to Srikanth, who will walk you through some of the more cloud reporting stuff and the demo there. So,
I know it's been a lot of terms and a lot of things that have been thrown around, but the key thing here that we want to take away is there are going to be people who are targeted to create reports. There'll be some admins or somebody else. They don't need extensive knowledge in terms of the skills that we just outlined here. What they do need is an idea of how the relationship is and the model is. So that's why I'm encouraging you to go back, and who is in charge in your department is going to create the reports and share it for others, to go back and look at the data model. So we talked about, Kieran talked about work items or incidents. The relationship between a work item and an incident, if you go into that Visio diagram, it'll be pretty obvious. If you're familiar with object-oriented design, work item is a very high-level class, contains generic properties of any work item. From the work item are many specific work items. Incident, change are all types of work item which derive from the base class work item. And oftentimes, you need to know, if you're running a business, if you want to be optimized for certain things, you need to know how many incidents got created. Well, great, that's very important in some cases. So you need to be able to create a report on incidents. Totally awesome, we can do that. But there are times when you go back and say, I don't really care what type of incident, how many work items are my teams processing per month, regardless of whether it's item, and you don't have to go specifically take individual reports and somehow try to aggregate them. You can actually create a separate report that only targets work item class, and that'll give you the summation or whatever you require at that level. So, and there'll be very similar constructs, except in one case you'll be targeting a derived class. And how do you know all these things? And that's where the data model comes into play, just to go back and say, hey, I know that the work item classes are derived from, incident is derived from work items, and that's what I want to report. So the data model will help you navigate the relationships and understand what the dimensions, which dimension that you need to pick and how to report on them. So I strongly recommend you to go back and take a look at that. The XML and everything else that we showed here, totally not necessary if you're not going to do anything. Out-of-the-box reporting will totally work. Self-service will totally work. You pick your columns. You don't need anything. Unless you want to go define your own things that are not necessarily available, that you have to resort to even XML. So at least that's the point that I want to communicate. Let me now try... So this is 2. Give me a second. Awesome. Thank you. So I'm going to switch gears here a little bit. As we mentioned earlier, reports are going to be available in at least 2 distinct forms here. One is Excel. Once it's available in cubes, you can expose them as Excel reports. You just saw that. It's going to leverage the existing features of, let's say, pivot tables, and you can actually decide what you want to be in a reports, charts, whatnot. Then you can take them and publish them out. Either publish them in a share. The key thing that I want you to understand is once a report is created and published in a share, that share could be a SharePoint share, it could be a regular file share, or you can email them out. It doesn't matter. Anytime you're going to open the report has a direct connection to the database. So if you open the report yesterday, it's going to give you, as long as the data is processed and it's available in the data store, the report is going to give you the current state. So if it was showing you 250 incidents yesterday and you open the report today and you hit refresh, or if it's already open and hit refresh, you're going to see the new data, which is 270, show up. So please bear in mind that without you doing anything, it's always going to show you the latest data. So the concept of a monthly report and a yearly report and a quarterly report has gone away. It's report live data. The charts are live. Everything is live. So if you have a date slicer, I mean, Keaton showed you slicers, and one of the slicers could be the years or the months or the quarters, which is already baked into the product right now. If you drag and drop one of the slicers to be a year, then you can actually come back and say, hey, show me only for the month of January or only for the year 2012. Then you can actually see the data change. But otherwise, you should assume that the report is live report using the current data. And the concept of a monthly and a yearly reports have gone away to show the actual report as it is right now. So with that said, let me quickly show you what you see here. Let me just minimize the screen here for a second. So what you see here is a SharePoint dashboard. Close. There you go. So what you see here is a SharePoint dashboard. This is an example when I keep talking about that you can create these reports. The report that you created in Excel, that was an Excel report. But if you use Performance Point, the same data set in the database can now be realized and surfaced through SharePoint using Performance Point. And here you have the richness of Performance Point kicking in, but also the collaboration and the sharing aspect of it automatically be available. So anybody who has access to this site and automatically gets this report, which is cool. And so it is ACL in that sense. Second, you don't have to do anything to go create new reports, and the URL is never going to change. As long as they come to this URL, you have that. So this is a report. It's a dashboard. And I'll show you how to quickly construct this dashboard as well as to customize it. That's number one. But before we go down that path, I'll also show another one. I wanted to show you something else. The system is not responding. There you go. Okay. So earlier, through the console, we published to a share a set of Excel reports. Again, somebody created a report in console, identified the areas, gave it a name, put it on a share, access through the console. But the share happens to be a SharePoint share. It shows up here. And in this particular configuration, I have Office Web App installed as part of this. So if Office Web App, how many people here use Office Web App? Okay, so at least 25% of the people use it. So what just happened here is I don't need to have Excel on my client desktop. It's just going to give it to me. It's a SharePoint. So the data that you published in a share from some console, and in this case, Service Manager data warehouse console, ended up in a SharePoint share, and SharePoint already has it configured. So you just broadcasted the URL, and they just saw this. So this is completely under your control in terms of who gets to see what and what your report layout is, and they get to do the benefits. Again, this is all existing out-of-the-box functionality of SharePoint. We didn't do anything. We just ensure that the data is in a form that can be consumed. If you want to do certain things, if you want to do the same pick and choose, make changes, you can open it up in Excel client right from here. But oftentimes, if it's not available, and that's totally okay, you can disable that. In this particular case, it'll just be a read-only version. You're not able to write back or make changes, because if I go and show you this, the data the Office Web App limits the amount of things that you can do. You can refresh the connections, or you can actually go back and point a different connection, but that's about it. It's a read-only view of this. Okay? It doesn't give you the power of Excel client, but it's still something very convenient. Nobody has to know anything more than just point them to an URL, and then you get it. So I just want to get that communicated. So that's, again, this SM library is something that you decided to go publish as a report person. You said, okay, I'm going to go publish it as in this report. We're just surfacing it here. So let's go back to the dashboard. So let's quickly, in the next 10 minutes or so, what I'll show is how to take an existing, the same thing that we did in Excel report. I can do a very similar exercise, push the data into SharePoint, and then once it's available, then you can start consuming it in SharePoint. And if time allows, the existing dashboard, I can actually modify that using a performance point web part and very quickly so it's basically you're building up your dashboard. So let me quickly do that. So performance point comes with a designer, performance point designer. And what the performance point designer does is helps you construct a dashboard. Yes, please, that's a question. This is not Service Manager portal. It's a SharePoint site. Right. If Service Manager is installed, it will be installed in the same SharePoint, but it will be a different site. So this is a dashboarding site that we created on SharePoint. Think of this as this cannot be a SharePoint Service Manager portal because you're going to show, this is a dashboarding thing, you're going to show metrics from different pieces. It just so happens to show what's the system center data today in the dashboard, but in your real world, you're going to show data from other pieces as well. So this is just dashboarding capability in SharePoint. Okay, and another point to note is Service Manager works with SharePoint Foundation, which is free, but the capabilities that I'm about to describe you are not available in SharePoint Foundation. This requires the SharePoint, the server version of that, the enterprise server version of that. But again, we are finding that SharePoint's growth is viral in the enterprise. You already have it. It's just leveraging the feature set. And I own chargeback as a feature that's coming up later in the cycle. And I intend to go back and take advantage of this so you can actually see your charges on all these things also reflect in the same dashboarding concept in SharePoint and in Excel. So what we do here is it's very quick. SharePoint, right, at this point, SharePoint Designer is going to go very similar in its approach. You need to tell its data source, and you say, okay, here are my data connections. Once I tell you the data connections, you're going to say, hey, what do I do with that connection? So I pick my cubes or I pick my elements that I need to show, and then complete that piece. So let me quickly walk through that. There's already a test connection that I created this morning. I'll show that to you. And we'll use that. So in this particular case, the database server that I use is DB03. And once I do that, it's going to bring me all the databases that are in that cube, and I'm going to go pick this one as my cube. And once I do that, it's going to interrogate the system, and it's going to give me all the cubes that are available. So again, this is performance point, and it's looking at the cubes that were generated automatically by Service Manager. All I'm doing is pointing performance point to the existing cubes. Standard functionality. So if I pick, just for fun, I'm going to go pick the software update. Yeah, that's the one that I wanted. So if I do this, that's all I have to do. I just saved it. So in this particular connection, all I did was to say, hey, go to this database, go to this server, go to this database, this cube, and that is now encapsulated in this connection property. Once I have that, I'll rename it to something else. Test is not good. Then I can go to performance point. There's already a software upgrade. Let me delete that. So in performance point, I need to somehow tell that, hey, create a new report. And new report is of type, let's say, grid chart. There are different types of things that I can do. I'm going to go pick a table. And it's going to pick the connection. and I'm going to go finish it off. So earlier in Excel, you saw a very similar experience. We saw dimensions, we saw measures, the same thing, because the data set is the same. So now suddenly I can now get a set of things from here to choose. So I can probably pick software update compliance. Let me just do this here. And then in dimensions, maybe the computer dim, I'll pick the IP address. I mean, I can do anything I want here. I don't know what the data set is, but this seems to be good enough when I tried this morning. So all I'm doing here is I'm just picking an IP address that's already there in CMDB. Earlier, if you remember, CMDB is going to collect all the data from Ops Manager, from Config Manager. It's flowing into DW automatically. DW automatically cubes it up, and that's all done for you when you install the product and when you configure the connectors. When the data is already flowing and it's cubed up, all I'm doing is going to performance point and then say, hey, pick these characteristics that I'm interested in. That's all I did here. So you can see that some kind of a compliance measure, some IP addresses don't even have this, and some of them are 100%. But this is exactly the thing that you need. You need to go back and chase down and make things into compliant. So so this is a report that's already there, but it's only in Designer. So let's save this. Let's get out of the way here. Don't save, that's fine. And then we go to our page. Dashboards. As you see, it's all bringing live data. And the dashboard that you just created, it's good, but I want to change it to include this one. So if you've used SharePoint and if you've done some very minimal customizations on that, SharePoint is web part based. And one of the web parts that comes out of the box when you have the right version of the product is a performance point web part. So I'm going to say, I'm not going to worry about the aesthetics a little bit. I'm going to go with the one right here. So if you go look at it, somewhere here is performance point web part. And remember, we created a report. I'm just going to go add that report here. And I need to configure this web part to the, I just go here. The report, the software update that I just created. So in the performance point content, you can actually go back and see somewhere here, there must be something called software update. Okay, software update is here. There's a URL. There's a bug in SharePoint that doesn't actually carry forward the URL. That's something that I need to manually copy. But if I know that, all I have to come here is, I'm done. I'm going to go apply. And say OK. And when I say OK, and I'm going to exit out of the edit mode. By the way, this editing functionality is available only if you're only if an admin. Okay, so okay, I'm done. How do I close this thing? Okay, let me see. Maybe it'll want me. So in just a few clicks, what we have done is we have added this the compliance report to your existing dashboard. And you didn't do any code. The system already worked. As long as the management packs and the system and the connectors existed, you just came back and wired them up, and you told them, hey, in Dashboard, please show it to me, and that's all happened. So that's the power that we wanted to communicate is, hey, we can use SharePoint, you can use Excel, it's all configurable, we didn't have to write line of code, we have done all the work. And as Caden was mentioning earlier, you can do this if you want to invest, build your own. This is going to be one of your choices that you make. It's a build your own. The power of having this entire data warehouse, totally awesome. But you have to now put tons of money and effort in order to maintain it. But if it is automated, we give it to you in a declarative fashion. And when we upgrade, the system automatically upgrades for you. And it's an easy to use. So we are bringing down the cost of creating reports dramatically down by doing all these things in automated fashion. So you can now pick and choose and become self-service. And that was the key point. And it's available it's consumable in the tools that you have today. And you don't have to relearn any of these. If I can somehow get to page to save, which I seem to be struggling right now. Stop editing. Save, I want to save. Okay, I'll stop editing. Hopefully that should be fine. Okay, there you go. So if I'll just, for sanity, I'll just go back and then go click on this dashboard again. So you're talking to live data. You just composed a dashboard with a click and drop. It's available, so anybody who's now accessing this page suddenly gets another measure for them to go back and make some meaningful decisions on. So with that, I just want to end the session and open it up for Q&A. Let me just get my... Okay, one more time. Awesome. So there are a few more hands-on labs that are still available. This recording will be available for you to go take a look at it. And I'm happy to hang around and answer some questions. But I just want to just go back and communicate this. What we are trying to do here is make the cost of creating reports extremely simple, make it automated, make sure that people use their existing tools, and self-service. Because one of them, as Caden mentioned earlier, we tried the canned reports first, which was norm. And it was very quickly a great learning experience because the needs of people are so many. There's no one particular solution is going to solve. And we don't want to go back and impose the cost of creating custom reports every time to the customers so that it becomes unusable or the ROI becomes very high for you to go back and then have a meaningful conversation. So we hope that this self-service experience is the way forward, and we're going to continue to invest. Our new reports that we're going to go back in terms of chargeback, in terms of other features that we're trying to leverage on the existing ones. So we bring more and more data of the System Center already collects a ton of data. So we're going to bring all of them into warehousing and make sure that they're available through this mechanism. Okay. So with that, thank you very much. I really appreciate you patiently walking through. I know it was pretty dense, but the demo gods were with me today, so I need to thank them too. So the demos came through. So thank you.